Our topic today is blood. Each chapter includes objectives from our syllabus. This list is an excellent study guide for you, and I encourage you to use it. So at the end of this chapter, you are expected to be able to list the physical properties of blood, list the components of blood and explain their functions, describe the structure and function of erythrocytes and hemoglobin, explain erythropoiesis and list factors necessary for it to occur, list the types, structural features, origin, and properties of leukocytes. Explain significance of differential white blood cell count and list the normal values. State the structure, origin, and function of platelets. Describe hemostasis and clot dissolution. And lastly, explain ABO and RH blood groups. So why are we studying blood anyway? How is this going to help you in the future? Most of you are going into a health-related field. At your future jobs, you will likely need to be able to interpret the results of blood draws, shown here. Understand and perform AccuChecks, which are blood glucose readings. You may also have to give blood to patients. And you will definitely be interacting with blood, so you'll need to know why you need to take safety measures. Even if you end up in a job outside of healthcare, if you have kids or pets, or just enjoy CSI shows, understanding blood's properties will prove to be useful to you. Blood is our internal transport system. It is the life-sustaining transport vehicle of the cardiovascular system. Blood has three main functions. The first function is transport. Blood delivers oxygen and nutrients to body cells and transports metabolic wastes to lungs and kidneys for elimination. It also transports hormones from the endocrine organs to the target organs. The second function of blood is regulation. Blood maintains body temperature by absorbing and distributing heat. It also maintains the normal pH through the use of buffers. And lastly, it functions in regulation by maintaining adequate fluid volume in the circulatory system. The third function of blood is protection. Plasma proteins and platelets prevent the body from losing blood. Antibodies, complement proteins, and white blood cells in the blood prevent infections. Next, we will discuss the composition of blood. Blood is the only fluid tissue. It is a connective tissue. Its matrix is a non-living fluid called plasma. The cells of blood are the living blood cells called formed elements. The formed elements of blood include erythrocytes, or red blood cells, or RBCs, leukocytes, or white blood cells, or WBCs, and platelets. When blood is drawn, placed into a tube and centrifuged, it separates into three layers. Erythrocytes are found on the bottom and make up 45% of the blood. So we see those down here. The term hematocrit means the percent of blood volume that is red blood cells. Normal values for males are 47% plus or minus 5%, and for females, a normal value for hematocrit is 42% plus or minus 5%. Above the erythrocytes, we find this thin whitish layer called the buffy coat. It contains white blood cells and platelets and makes up less than 1% of the blood volume. At the top of the tube, we would find the liquid plasma. This makes up about 55% of whole blood. Some physical characteristics of blood include that it is sticky and opaque with a metallic taste. The color of the blood depends on its oxygen content. Higher oxygen content will result in a bright red colored blood, whereas a lower oxygen content results in a darker red blood. The pH of blood always ranges between 7.35 and 7.45. and the average male has 5 to 6 liters of blood, whereas the average female has 4 to 5 liters of blood. Now we will continue through the different components of blood, starting with plasma. Blood plasma is straw-colored, sticky, and about 90% water. There are over 100 dissolved solutes in the plasma, including nutrients, gases, hormones, and wastes. Plasma proteins are the most abundant solutes in the plasma. They remain in the blood and are not taken in by cells. Proteins are produced mostly by the liver, with albumin being the most important one. Albumin makes up 60% of all the plasma proteins. It functions as a carrier of other molecules, a buffer, and also contributes to plasma osmotic pressure. The next blood component are formed elements. The formed elements are red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. White blood cells are the only complete cell of the group. Red blood cells do not have a nucleus and some other organelles, and platelets are merely cell fragments. Most formed elements live in the bloodstream for only a few days. Blood cells originate in the bone marrow and do not divide. This SEM shows the formed elements, or leukocytes, white blood cells, erythrocytes, red blood cells, and platelets. We will also be seeing slides like these in lab. This is a blood smear. There are lots of red blood cells. Also, we can see different white blood cells, which are the neutrophils, eosinophils, lymphocytes, and monocytes. And you can see the small cell fragments called platelets. Starting with erythrocytes, or red blood cells. They are small diameter cells that contribute to gas transport. They are biconcave shaped, anucleate, and have no organelles. They are filled with hemoglobin for gas transport. Their diameters are larger than some capillaries. So how do they flow through our capillaries? Well, their plasma membranes contain the protein spectrin, which provides flexibility and allows the red blood cells to change shape. Three features make red blood cells efficient for gas transport. The biconcave shape offers huge surface area relative to volume for gas exchange. Hemoglobin makes up 97% of the cell volume, and we know hemoglobin carries the gases. Lastly, red blood cells have no mitochondria. Remember, mitochondria make ATP aerobically, so the red blood cells do not use up the oxygen they are transporting to make their own ATP, and instead transport it to the cells for their use. Here are the functions of red blood cells. They are dedicated to respiratory gas transport. Hemoglobin binds reversibly with oxygen. Normal hemoglobin values are 13 to 18 grams per 100 milliliters for males and 12 to 16 grams per 100 milliliters for females. Hemoglobin consists of a red heme pigment bound to the protein globin. Globin is made up of 4 polypeptide chains, 2 alpha and 2 beta. The heme pigment is bonded to each globin and is responsible for blood's red color. Each heme's central iron atom binds to one oxygen gas molecule, or O2. On the top of this slide, we see a red blood cell and how it has tons and tons of hemoglobin. So you can see it up here, and just this little part, we have all this different hemoglobin. So everything inside of this square is a hemoglobin molecule. And you can see that in the hemoglobin, whoops, where's the cursor? Inside this hemoglobin, we have 4 polypeptide chains, and in each one of these polypeptide chains, we have an oxygen molecule being held. On the bottom we can see that the hemoglobin molecule made up of these 4 heme groups each carries oxygen gas. So we can see here there are the 4 heme groups, then there's oxygen gas. And what's holding on to that oxygen? It's the iron atom inside of that heme group. Okay, so here's the heme group, there's the iron atom. So on the left, it shows what hemoglobin looks like in the tissues after oxygen is delivered to the tissues. And on the right, it shows what it looks like when it's in the lungs after oxygen has attached to the hemoglobin. Each hemoglobin molecule can transport 4 oxygen molecules. Each red blood cell contains 250 million hemoglobin molecules. When oxygen is loaded onto the hemoglobin in the lungs, it produces oxyhemoglobin, which has a ruby red color. When oxygen is unloaded into the tissues, it produces deoxyhemoglobin, or reduced hemoglobin, which has a dark red color. Carbon dioxide can then be loaded onto the hemoglobin when it's in the tissues. Only 20% of the carbon dioxide in our blood is bound to hemoglobin, and it produces carbaminohemoglobin. Okay, this is where we're going to stop for today. Thank you, and we will catch up with you after this.